I beat Final Fantasy XVI and I wanted to talk about it because it's a very interesting game to really think about in terms that it has very lofty goals and it strives to do two things very ambitiously. It's not a bad video game, but with the pedigree that a numbered Final Fantasy game has, people had high expectations for it, and I don't believe that 16 delivered on them. The good. The graphics are good, I like the character designs, the colors used for the magic all stands out, and it looks really nice. The combat, it's good, it's flashy, you have this huge pool of attacks and special moves that you can upgrade and swap between that are pretty fun to play with. The main character, Clive, he's got to be one of my favorite video game protagonists I've seen in a while. I like that in a world full of quip masters, Clive is just an honest, earnest, kind guy. He's not making jokes. He's not being super edgy. He's just nice. You know, he's had a rough life and he doesn't want other people to have a rough life. And he's very kind and, empathetic. And I like that. You don't see that a lot in modern gaming protagonists or even older gaming protagonists. The music is great. More specifically, the use of music is really good. They truly know when to play what during certain moments to really add impact. I think there's plenty of cutscenes and scenarios where the music escalates and, gets a lot louder than it normally is to really emphasize a certain point or visual. And I think that's all done excellently. And finally, the visual spectacle of the icon fights is just incredible. Like, it truly is a gorgeous looking game. It really feels like I'm playing on a real next-gen system, playing a next-gen video game. It doesn't feel like a PS4 game. It doesn't feel like a normal PC game. It feels like an incredibly visually impressive game when you're doing an icon fight. Certain icon fights more than others, but by the end, most of them are just big and fantastic and beautiful looking, and they're epic. They're grand in a way that I don't think is really captured in other video games. So, the bad. The combat is only half good. While plenty of the moveset is just ripped from Devil May Cry, it's not Clive's moveset that I have a problem with. Clive might have a lot of really cool abilities and tools at his disposal, but the enemies in Final Fantasy XVI leave a lot to be desired. I don't think the enemies in this game are engaging for the most part, basically. Many share the same move pool, and none of them seem to be balanced around Clive's ever-increasingly powerful abilities. Dodge, parry, block, teleportation, stun mechanics. Clive has a lot of ways to avoid damage and control the battlefield, and most enemies, even bosses, don't feel like they were designed to challenge any of those abilities. So the combat kind of ends up feeling more Dynasty Warriors. It feels very samey. You get more powerful and stronger, and you get to do more and more cool stuff, and enemies kind of just feel really weak in comparison. And now, while I said the icon fights, the big summon monster fights, are the visual peak of the game, I found them to be a mechanical downgrade because you're forced to use the limited move pool of Ifrit instead of Clive. Icon fights never really feel like you're controlling a giant monster either, which is fine, by the way. It's fine in a vacuum. It's less fine because without Ifrit feeling like you're controlling a big kaiju monster, it just feels like you're controlling a worse version of Clive. It sucks a little bit of joy out of those experiences because they could have been better. They feel like they could have been more than what they are. Moving on to the story, I think the story is one note. There is no complexity in it. Well, no real complexity. Final Fantasy XVI adds a lot of characters and names and places, but the motivations and goals never change. The good guys are always good, and their motivations are always clear. The bad guys are always bad, and their motivations are clear enough. Like, they want to be evil. The premise of the game is to get revenge, and then it changes to stop the bad guys. And that's it. I found the world of Final Fantasy XVI to be particularly uninteresting. And not just because the side quests are boring, though they are boring. They're about as complex as quests you'll find from World of Warcraft back in 2004. No, the world is uninteresting because there just isn't anything unique about it. It is by far like the most generic fantasy world that I've played in a long, long time. I personally didn't feel like the world building did it any more justice either. While there could be some things that get a little bit more fleshed out here and there, they're not adding flesh to anything that needs it. Like, on my first playthrough, I didn't remember the names of all the different factions at first, so when I went off to fight the Iron Islanders, I thought they were the Empire, and it turns out it doesn't make a difference. And I guess my point is, if every enemy you fought in this game were just all renamed to be from the same faction, like they were all from the Empire or from Waloed, or if you took it to even more extreme, if you took every enemy in this game and you placed all of them with the Heartless enemies from Kingdom Hearts, the story of the game would not change at all. The ugly truth. I think the characters in Final Fantasy XVI are very likable, and that is enough for me to enjoy the story. But I can't help but feel like this game tried very hard to be similar to a certain HBO television program. And in trying to be like that TV show, it failed to create an interesting world or truly unique story. I think playing as Clive is fun. He has a large pool of moves and abilities and stuff. However, I don't think fighting against the enemies of FF16 is fun for as long as this game is. I mean, it took me like 50 hours to 100% a first playthrough, and the combat got real stale by hour 30. I think for being an action RPG, Final Fantasy XVI feels like it's missing a lot of RPG elements. And the elements it decides to keep feel so trivial, they're practically meaningless. There's no reason to equip armor or a sword that have lower stat values. It's just pick the next upgrade that makes the number go up. It's just something that's so insignificant that I think the game would be better without it altogether. In trying to make combat more action-focused, I feel like FF16 missed some crucial elements that make an action game really good. In trying to have a more adult story, they tried to be more complicated by adding a lot of different characters and perspectives and having fantasy politics, or they tried to talk about slavery. The game just never really delivers on any of those things. It has all of them, but the plot, at its core, is about a prince and his friends who go against an evil ruler and eventually fight a godlike being, and all of that is pretty generic when it comes to RPGs, even Final Fantasy ones. I don't think Final Fantasy XVI is a bad game, by the way, but I do think it's somewhere between a 5 out of 10 and a 6 out of 10 game. And going into this game with massively lower expectations is probably the best way to experience it. You know, don't hold it up to any high standard and it will be a good time. I enjoyed the game well enough. However, I was constantly comparing it to specifically two other things that it just didn't compare well against. There's plenty to like about Final Fantasy XVI. And there's plenty to be disappointed by, which is a shame. However, if they learn the right lessons from this game, the core of Final Fantasy XVI could easily be improved upon and become the foundation for something even greater.